Hello, so I'd like to welcome you here on Sarsfield's Virtual Pub to another video, and I'm interviewing here Gerry McGeough from County Tyrone. And I suppose in my short series of Republicans or ex-Republicans who believe strongly in the restoration of the Catholic faith in Ireland, this in a kind of way would be my second video. So welcome Gerry, thank you for agreeing to this interview.
Absolutely, thank you very much indeed, Brian. And before we start, perhaps we could say a wee prayer.
Yeah.
And then you may have agus an big, agus spirit nave, amen. Should have a water clan the grass that han tune and yet the spunny who the mara agus spunny who from Lisa. Leaving water or wacha jay we are in a packy and this agus or wash, amen. And then you may have agus an big, agus a spirit nave, amen.
So I'd like to ask you about your background.
Yeah, sure, of course. Well, my name is Gerry McGeough, although this particular area where we live is called McGeough, which is closest to the Gaelic, the original Gaelic. I was born here in the Brantry area, and our family have lived here for centuries. The tradition is that we were driven out of Lough Gall, which is in neighbouring County Armagh, by the Cromwellians, and we've done research to that effect, and we can see that we could trace the name back to the 1600s in the area. It might have even been around earlier and through the maternal lines and whatnot. But in any event, this is where we are, and I was born at a time, well, I was born in 1958, which was an interesting year insofar as it was the very tail end of the Pius XII papacy. And so I suppose I got the very end of the true Catholic faith, if you want to put it like that.
Yeah.
So I grew up here in the north, in the 6 counties, although my mother was from North Monaghan, which is quite close by, a mere matter of less than about 10 miles or less. And so we had strong connections to the North Monaghan area, and it's in this area. This is the salient of East Tyrone, which juts into Armagh and Monaghan. So it's quite common for people to marry into all the people from both Armagh and Monaghan. So quite a mix here, if you like.
Yeah.
In any event, it's a very historic area. Not far from where we're speaking was a friary. It was established in the late 1500s. Where Hugh O'Neill brought friars, Franciscan friars from Armagh when they had been burnt out of it, which is about 12 miles away. And they were given refuge in this, which had been a very wooded area at the time. And they were heavily involved in the various uprisings that took place right up to the 1640s, from the 1590s, the so-called 9 Years' War, and beyond that. And they had strong traditions, and one of them who lived there in the 1640s, was actually was asked by the Catholic insurrectionists to keep a diary of the blow-by-blow account of the war. Correct, absolutely. Yeah. Friar O'Mallon's diary, it was always spoken about around here, was Kinley Allen, and the original sits in Cork University. Yeah. And a neighbour of mine who, God rest him, died there quite recently, had done a number of stories on it, and he had seen it and read through it, and he told me that it was so thin at this stage, like toilet paper, it was almost frightening having to turn the pages. But it was written in the East Ulster dialect of Irish, which has died out. Although in the late 1940s, when traces of it were still spoken by native speakers in North Louth and South Armagh, it was brought to them and read to them 300 years later after it had been written, and they understood every word of it, which is quite remarkable. So in any event, though that friary had a big impact on the local area here, as you can imagine, because the friars educated the people, and they also kept the faith very strong.
What would be the name of that friary?
It was known as the friary, basically, and it's overlooking a loch. Gwyn came here in the mid-19th century, the antiquarian, and he described it as a perfect natural amphitheatre, and he described the area, which is very historic, and he also repeated the legend, which continues to this day, that before they eventually left or were driven out in the late, I think it was the 1670s, the friars threw all their chalices and whatnot into a local loch. Yeah. And he threw new light on it for us, that one young peasant lad had died and took them out. I hadn't heard that before. But in any case, yes.
But that Canon Coslet, Quinn, is it?
I beg your pardon?
You were saying the antiquarian, is it Quinn, is that what you said?
No, Gwyn. Gwyn, yeah, one of the old Anglo-Irish antiquarians who did tremendous work. Yeah. And he spoke about Slieve na Mhuil, which was a mound built on a neighbouring hill here, where they stood to look over the old country, as you know, is a high-hilled area with a lot of views, and it was used for military purposes in that regard.
So,
And he recorded that, and Sliabh na Mhaíl is mentioned when Friar O'Malley is writing the thing. And of course he brings in all of Ireland. He talks about place names down in Waterford and here, there, and everywhere. Followed the army.
So you've obviously done the history of this area quite a bit. So what would you say that the East Tyrone people bring to Ireland? Well, what type of characteristics do they have?
Well, that's actually very interesting. One of my daughters is doing a master's in international relations, and part of her studies involves precisely what you just asked me a few days ago. And my conclusion is that it's in the DNA of the people. That throughout history, this has somehow or other always been the epicenter of uprisings in one thing or another, and a strong Gaelic, Irish and Catholic sense of community amongst the people.
So to be fair to say, you have a strong sense of identity?
A strong sense of identity, yes, absolutely. It would be very fair to say,
Yeah. And did that impact then when you got involved in politics?
True, absolutely. Impacted both for and against me, but I didn't waver. I mean, I stick to my principles, whether it's right or, whether I get acclaim or get abuse, and I tend to get quite a bit of abuse anyway. But still, no, you can't waver. You cannot just go with the flow, as it were, which is what most people tend to do, which is why the country's in the mess it's in. So if you believe in something, you stand for it, right? Or, whether it's good or bad or indifferent towards your personal self. And this is what we need. This is absolutely what we need now. We need people to stand, not surrender, not give in, and go forward with what they believe, because this country is going down the tubes rapidly. I don't have to tell you that. We can all see it happening all around us, because it has lost its sense of itself. And veering off to some extent, I'm a teacher by profession. When I was doing teacher training, we got into discussions, with lecturers and whatnot. And one of the modules we were doing, all the various teachers came together and blah blah blah. I practically blew a gasket when one woman talked about she was getting her students to do a history of Elizabeth I, a feminist icon, So I don't know how I restrained myself, but eventually I blew a gasket, and I told her that, that Elizabeth I was a genocidal maniac. And all you have to do is to come into Tyrone and see what her commanders boasted about. Killing every living thing, man, woman, children, cat, dog, cow, you name it, to within 4 miles of Dungannon, following an amphibious landing at Lough Day. So she was a murderous tyrant. She wasn't a feminist icon, although maybe they're interchangeable, I don't know. But in any event, that was her. And the lecture then was going on about, we must, present the kids with projects like studies of Bono or Gay Byrne. And I was thinking, what? I mean, here we are in Ireland, we have the greatest history possible. We have people like Owen Roe O'Neill, we have Brian Boru, we have Padraig Pearse, we have great martyrs, Albert O'Brien down in Limerick, and you name it. And we're studying these zombies, I mean, how and then I eventually got her to the point where which I knew was going on, but I got her to admit it. I said, is this the EU doing this to whittle down our sense of nationalism? And she eventually, I said, yes, that's what's happening. So that's why we need to get out of the EU, one reason now, as far as I'm concerned. So you and, if you like, the DUP seem to get on great in some respects. No, we don't get on great at all. We hit each other's guts.
I know,
I want to see them converted to Catholicism. And I don't know what they're all. I mean, having said that, you're absolutely right. We do have some common ground on issues like abortion. Although they're getting very weak on that at the moment. But having said that, I mean, there are some common ground issues. But don't get me wrong, I'm a Catholic, an Irish Catholic, and I believe in a Gaelic Irish Catholic nation.
Do you think people in the South underestimate the hatred that some unionists have towards Catholics?
Yeah, they completely haven't a clue. I mean, these are planters, and we've had. It's a very strange relationship, because we have Protestant neighbours around us, and we get on the best, but to some extent it's superficial. But nevertheless, there's a long history of killing one another between us all. So you don't dispel that, and it's in the folklore and so on. But when you get back to the DNA part of it there again, we're among the Irish in East Tyrone. as opposed to the British garrison, which is what you're referring to. The native Irish people always had a martial spirit, shall we say, and that's why the Vikings never got in here. You know, they got in, they established their forts in Dublin and Waterford and Cork and Limerick and so forth, but they never got into Ulster, and part of the reason was that central Ulster, which is where we are, put up such fierce resistance. And prior to Brian Boru's wonderful victory at Clontarf, the Viking grip on Ireland was effectively broken in the 990s, so about 20 years earlier, and that was an Ulster-led charge in a battle outside of Dundalk, effectively.
So you're very knowledgeable of Irish history. So what comparison, what lessons can we learn from Irish history and apply right now? So what period would you say we're in now?
Well, here in the 21st century, there are comparisons to be made, and again, I'll eventually get telling this one about the DNA because it actually goes right back to what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
The Bruce Wars, which took place around 13, 14, 15, Bruce invasions they call it, were again centred in East Tyrone because the Donald O'Neill, who was the O'Neill at the time, the guy who actually built Dungannon, the fort of Dungannon, pulled together the various other Irish chieftains, demi-kings really were, particularly in the north, and they invited Bruce over to be king, and Edward the Bruce, who was a brother of Robert the Bruce, came over. He became King Edward I, buried down in Faughard, as we all know, and they came over here and they won every battle they fought. They won every battle. They beat the Anglo-Irish, whipped them, kicked them around, you name it, they put them down, along with the Irish primarily from Ulster, and yet they lost the war, okay, for a whole host of reasons, which is too complicated to go into here right now. But it was, while what was ostensibly a defeat with the killing of Bruce himself and then the breakup of the alliance, actually turned into a victory about 30-40 years later. It had broken the power of the Anglo-Irish kingdom, Little Kingdom, the Norman Anglo-Normans, whatever they would want to call them, and they retreated to the Pale area around Dublin, and the rest of them either went native around the Midlands and the south and so forth. The East Ulster, which would be now Antrim and Down, totally collapsed. The de Burgh dynasty and so on there. The Anglo-Norman control of it ended. The earldom of Ulster, as they called it at that stage. And the Clan Ibui, the children of Yellow Hugh O'Neill, pushed into that area from Tyrone here, of course, the north of Lough Neagh, and it became Clan Ibui. And of course, the rest is history. So then the Gaels regrouped, and eventually, thanks to the Black Death, the bubonic plagues, retook most of the country, and the various Anglo-Normans went native effectively.
So you reckon we can turn our defeat into a long-term victory?
Absolutely, no question about it. I mean, as long as we're here, as long as you're Irishmen in Ireland, we'll never be beaten. And all we have to do now is marshal ourselves, get things in order, but above all, get back to the faith. If we don't have the faith, we're nothing. Ireland is a Catholic nation. I want to emphasize it's a Catholic nation. It's not a Buddhist nation. It's not an Islamic nation. It's not a Protestant nation. It's not a secular nation. It's a Catholic nation. Ireland can only be Catholic, nothing else. That defines us and our nationhood. And getting back to the Bruce invasion, that heralded the beginning of the Gallogly, the Galloglasses, as they're referred to in English, who would come from the western part of Western Scotland, the Hebrides and Highlands and so on. And they were Norse Gaels, if you like, and they had a fighting spirit. And they were invited down here to fight during the summer. And it began with the Bruce invasion. They began to get, they got to know one another, if you like. And they would come fight in summer months, then go back, or vice versa. I can't remember which.
So
and they stayed eventually. They stayed and they settled. And their DNA is in the blood of the people here.
So can I play the devil's advocate for that? So I mean, you're saying that the Irish got into the habit of employing the Scots to fight for them for that period, and they also appointed Edward the Bruce the King of Ireland, and he was Scottish. I mean, wouldn't they want to appoint a native Irish?
Well, I mean, keep in mind that when these were Gaels.
Yeah.
They spoke the same language as us.
Yeah.
They're Gaelic speaking. Yeah. The Irish in Ireland and Irish in Scotland at that time was practically indistinguishable. It was just like Munster Irish and Ulster Irish today. So they had no problem. They were all the same culture, same breed of people. And remember that Alban was taken over by the Irish tribe, the Scots. So
although the Bruces were Norman, I think.
they had gone native.
Yeah.
And Bruce himself, I mean, Robert the Bruce and Edward emphasised, and we have historical record for that, emphasised their Gaelic credentials. They talked about the one language, one people, one culture. Now, of course, the Bruces had another ulterior motive. They wanted to destabilise England by forming a Celtic alliance between the Scots, Irish and the Welsh to keep the English at bay from invading Scotland, which is fair enough, I would think that. But at the same time, they were right, they were all Gaelic speaking, and of course all Catholic at that stage.
Well, okay, so we might as well hit the button then. What do we do in Ireland now to do this, you know, to get the long-term victory instead of the short-term victory?
Well, you are talking probably long-term. I mean, if you look back 70 years ago, Catholic culture, especially in the south, had an iron grip on the situation. You know, every house was praying the rosary, people go to mass. You had maybe 3 priests in the most remote parishes. You know, there's so many priests you could ship them all over the world. And now we've gone from that to this. But that took 70 years, a combination of reasons, of course. But the faith was effectively lost. So we're looking at restoring all that in the next 70 years. Not exactly back to what it had been, but still the faith will flare up again. There's no question about it.
So that's number one in kind of the resurrection of Ireland from its current state would be to get the faith back.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Without that, we have nothing.
Yeah.
You know, the various people who follow ideologies like communism and fascism and you name it go nowhere because those are just airy-fairy things, you know. I mean, they don't belong, they're only imagination. Some guy wrote something way back, and that's based on that.
And would it be fair to say that you've hit some quite troubled times when we talk about warfare and prison sentences, etc.? And would it be fair to say that you found through your experience that the faith is, you know, really...
Well, yeah, well, I mean, sure, but I grew up with the faith, you know. It wasn't something that dawned on me, you know, when I was an adult. And even no matter how bad situations were, I always held a tenuous, and I'm no plaster saint, I like to emphasise that, but I always held on to the faith at all stages of my life. And if I could get to Mass, I went to Mass, you know, I made an effort to go to it. But and in fact, when I was in prison in Europe at one stage, they refused to let me go to Mass, which is the biggest scandal I could think of, you know. It was an outrage. But in any event, yes, back here, it was in the DNA of the people. We have a local man, Padraig O'Loughlin, who was a chaplain to Hugh O'Neill back in the 1600s. And he was arrested in court, brought up and hanged, drawn and quartered brutally after being tortured in Dublin. And he's from the neighbouring parish here, Donaghmore. He held on to the faith, and that's someone we should be emulating instead of Bono, you know. I mean, this is a Gael who held on to the faith, was hanged, drawn and quartered, and martyred effectively for the faith.
So it's okay. So the first step, if you like, to resurrect Ireland is the faith. So what practical steps could we take to achieve that end?
Well, we pray.
Yeah.
And you know, we're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves to some extent here, but anyway, yes, what we have to do is pray and pray and pray. And here in this area of Tyrone, I'm proud to say, if that's the right term, that I think we're the only county, I'm open to correction here, who have stood up to the loonies from the LGBT juggernaut who parade through various towns throughout Ireland. Well, you know, we're the ones that give them a hard time. We get out and we pray the rosary and they scream abuse at us, but we don't care, we're delighted. You know, we love to let them know that God really loves them. And we're still here. And they're still queer, you know, and we're still, you know, Tyrone is still a Catholic county, and the faith remains strong here as a sense of Irishness. And I'm happy to all those rosaries. Whether it's something, you know, it's obviously a projection of our Catholic faith. We can't hide it. We have to get out. Now's the time for getting out there and fighting. But it draws down graces, which may actually help these poor people, you know. And what I've noticed in the last couple of years, and I've been attacked, physically attacked, punched at them and everything. What I have noticed is that they have diminished considerably. And they're much more tacky now than what they would have been, say, even a couple of years ago. And they're not as noisy or loud. And our rosary groups are growing, and where we turn out and we take them on. And that's very, very important. And not to be afraid. And I notice a lot of people are afraid. You know, they're afraid to go out, but we have enough of a hardcore that don't care about that. We get out and pray.
And you're happy to do that as a lay person. You don't in any way.
Yeah, well, we're not going to wait on the bishops to do anything for us. I mean, God forbid they should preach the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
So we just, we'll wait for them to catch up.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, when we're out there, we're praying. We also pray for the pro-life issue, and it's a growing network. We have 10,000 people there in Dungannon, the neighbouring town. 65 people gathered on the one day at a specific hour. I think it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And all around the country, in every county, people were gathered. So there were actually 10,000 taking part in a rosary in conjunction with the Fatima apparitions and so forth.
Yeah.
And these things are vitally important. It means we get out there, we're seen as Catholic. And it's surprising, we have an immigrant population, people from East Timor and so on, and they come and join us, These are good Catholics.
Yeah.
So the Irish people need to keep one thing in mind, that if they abandon the faith, the country will be given to people who are staunch Catholics.
Yeah.
Simple as that, doesn't matter where they come from.
Yeah.
So we've been blessed with this country, but if we abandon the faith, it'll be taken from us, and control over it will be taken off us.
So would you say it's slightly improving then, the picture of Catholicism in Ireland, or would you say it's disimproving?
Well, I don't know what the status is exactly, but I know we're in the middle of a major conflict here in terms of a spiritual war, and we have to stand up for our faith. We basically have to do what the martyrs did in the past. Hopefully we won't be hanged, drawn and quartered, but who knows,
Yeah.
And in this area here, we had mass rocks where the people kept the faith, even though it was detrimental to them personally, but they still held on to it, and through my own ancestry and so on. And that's something that weighs very heavily on us, But having said that, that DNA is also, that is in us, that spirit, the good Catholic spirit.
Yeah.
And we must preserve it from generation to generation. It's only as strong as the generation that hangs on to it, And I'm very disappointed about how things have gone among so-called Catholics, people who consider themselves Catholics. And I go to the traditional Latin Mass because it's the only Catholic Mass I can find. When I, for whatever reason, end up at Novus Ordo Masses, it's just unbelievable. You have all these people running over the altar, mostly women, who aren't priests and are handling the body of Christ, which is a serious thing to be at. It's going to be detrimental to them when they're judged. And some of them boast about using contraception. They're using contraceptives and giving out Holy Communion, putting into the paws of other people who promote abortion, which is utterly and totally it's a desecration. And that's why the church is going down, because it's desecrating the Eucharist. So the pure reverence is only available and given through the Latin Mass and to traditional Catholicism. And that's the route forward. Sorry for interjecting, that is the route forward for us. Once we do that, once we get that established, the faith will become stronger, and people need to go to confessions. Some people, they live if you go to any funeral of anybody, you see what a la-di-da world we're in. They bring up like a packet of cigarettes or something, because he liked to smoke and died of young lung cancer. And then they bring up some other rubbish. What has that got to do with anything? And what we should be saying is, where is this individual now? Are they in heaven? Are they in purgatory? Or are they in hell? And if they died with a mortal sin on their soul, perhaps if it was a woman who used contraceptives, it was a man for whatever reason they were, doing it, and didn't confess and repent that, then boom, they go straight to hell. It's simple as that. Now, unless at the last second of their lives they repented, which case they end up in purgatory.
Yeah.
That has to be something that we are I want to emphasize. We must pray for the souls of people who are dead, people who are friends or relatives, strangers, because they're if they're in purgatory, if they're in hell, forget about them, but if they're in purgatory, they need our prayers. They can't help themselves, but we can help them. So that's the greatest act of charity any of us could possibly do, is to pray for the dead, so that eventually they would get themselves into heaven. Yeah.
So basically you would say that resurrecting the Catholic faith in Ireland is the most important thing to get Ireland going, and a few practical steps like that would be people should be encouraged to pray, go to confession, and go to the Latin Mass if they possibly can. Would that be fair?
It's a start. I think that's one thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, don't be ashamed to be Irish either. I mean, we're Irish. Be proud to be Irish. And we have a great tradition in this country. We have it's a wonderful breed of people, all the way back millennia, but throughout the centuries. And one thing has to be, as an historian, this is what I've noticed, it's plain as day. Like, every time the Irish turn their backs or get weak in the faith, we receive a chastisement, and that will come in the form usually of a foreign aggression. You know, when the wake of St. Patrick, we had the great golden era on the Isle of Saints and Scholars, and we sent people all over the known world, Bobbio and Italy, all over. And these were missionaries. You know, they went and they were remarkable characters. I mean, they weren't. Some of them were extremely eccentric, and they were quite something else. They stirred up trouble wherever they went, but they brought the faith and re-evangelized and re-Christianized Europe, which had fallen into the Dark Ages post-Roman Empire. And then with that golden age, but then we went downhill a bit, and you had monasteries attacking monasteries. You had all kinds of carry on going on between the so-called elite. You know, their sexual mores were to be deplored, and in come the Vikings and give us a real good whipping, and that was a torture, for a scourge, if you like, for about 200 years, perhaps 3, and then we began to get it together, restored the faith, we got strong again, but got weak after a period of time. It didn't follow through in our Catholic, and then the Normans came in.
Yeah.
And one thing about the Normans is, whatever you think of the Normans,
Yeah.
at least they were strong Catholics,
Yeah.
and you know, they were notorious for butchering all around them and then building a monastery, you know, on top of it, and to repent, as it were. But they, like, love them or loathe them, and we all have probably Norman blood in us to some extent.
Yeah.
At least they restored Catholicism, and they also brought in people, you know, they brought in the orders from the continent, which were very strong, some are with us to this very day.
Oh, okay, so can I press you with your great knowledge of history? Can I ask you, you mentioned the elites there, you said the elites were gone corrupt at that particular time. How would you rate the current elite in modern Ireland, like the heads of political parties, in comparison to what you could see previous generations? How do they compare?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure how you define elite in the current context. I think there's a bunch of morons, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
And they had no sense, no substance to them, no depth, no love of nation, no love of our history or love of anything Irish. Gombean people, you know, I mean, they're kowtowing to Europe, or they're kowtowing to the Brits, or kowtowing to somebody else.
Yeah.
We should be one of the most powerful countries in the world. You know, we've got the talent, we've got the ability, we've got the location. We own half the Atlantic, you know, all the mineral wealth is out there and everything else. But we're, I don't know, a Slovene type of people, and other than this, and that's because of centuries of oppression from the English to some extent.
Yeah.
If you read historical tracts from the 1600s, now you see how spirited the Irish were, especially here in Tyrone.
Yeah.
They were taking on the English like it was nobody's business, and if they were defeated, then they got up again and back at them. But then people were eventually ground down over the centuries, and we lost our own language. You know, which we effectively stopped speaking, although there's huge pressures on culture and everything else that went. So we're kind of aping a pale version of the English now, and then to some extent a pale version of the EU, if you want. So that type of mentality has to be overcome. For example, in the north here, okay, we went through 25 years of brutality. We had from the British, at the hands of the British, and this is very important. Within living memory, within my own memory, hundreds of Irish men, women, and children were gunned down like dogs by the British Army, their sidekicks in the RUC, the Orange Militias in the UDR, and the Loyalists, all part of the one team. And in several hundred years from now, historians will say, but there was an army, an Irish army, just a few miles away. You know, what was going on here? Yeah. Oh, they were in the Lebanon, partying down in Israel, nursing hangovers. Okay. And then in later years, people came from all over the world to seek asylum, and they were given tents or rooms, or they were given money every week. Any IRA volunteer who had to go on the run from the north wasn't given asylum in the south. They were given a good kicking in Monaghan Barracks and a cell in Portlaoise. And the Irish people stood idly by while other Irish people were gunned down. Now they're talking about booting out ambassadors from different countries here, embroiling themselves in rows that have nothing to do with us. Boot out the British ambassador. Neither the Russians nor the Israelis or anybody else has ever gunned down Irish people on Irish soil, but the British have done it umpteen times, notoriously, not just in our generation, but over the centuries. And they're the ones to kick out the British ambassador and bring them to international courts, because they're the ones who've done the damage to this country, nobody else. Simple as that. So that's a form of cowardice. Oh, well, we're worried about human rights over there, but don't talk to us about how they're terrorists and criminals and all the rest of it. But we're not. We're Irish people here in the north, and sometimes I wonder why we want to be united with the south that stabbed us in the back. But however, that's not the point. We have to give leadership here, and leadership is what we intend to give.
So when you look back at the Troubles then, mostly you would be proud of the IRA fighting back.
Absolutely. IRA were heroes, absolute heroes. Young men and women, for the most part, indeed teenagers, who lightly armed, volunteers, not getting paid any money, nothing, often paying out of their own pockets, took on the most formidable military force machine in Western Europe at the time, the British Army, which was backed up not only by the intelligence services and RUC and all the rest of it, but also a population which was a garrison, the planter unionist population here, all working against us. And yet, no, for 25 years they stood their ground and fought away. And the south of Ireland, instead of arming us, if they wouldn't send the army in to fight, they should have shipped arms to us. We had to go over to America to get guns from good, decent Irish Americans. And thanks be to God, throughout the south of Ireland, there was a good, healthy network of good, decent Irish patriots who provided us with backup, in all forms of safe homes and safe houses and all the rest of it. So, but they were heroes, absolute heroes. And time will show that these young men and women taking on the British Army, you can think about it, you're going out with just a motley ensemble of weaponry and not enough ammunition to really have a serious firefight. And you have maybe British Army helicopters over you, British Army circling the area, gunning us down and shooting and firing, and yet they kept firing away. And we've lost in this area in Tyrone huge numbers of people killed. I mean, it's frightening. Practically every graveyard, every parish has IRA volunteers in their graveyards, and innocent Catholics who are just gunned down to intimidate the population at large.
And what do you say about all these allegations that at the very high level the IRA was working with the British?
Well, a lot of that can be just smear and but having said that, yes, there was. I mean, the British wouldn't be doing their job if they hadn't have gotten infiltrated. But keep in mind, we infiltrated them too, and that's a story that has to be told as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of good information came from traitors on their side, which was able to be put into good effect, shall we say.
Yeah.
And but by and large, it was an uneven struggle, completely uneven struggle. But I think it broke Britain, I really do. And here's one of the things that's worth observing. Britain introduced its abortion laws in 1967. The first abortions legally took place in England in 1968, which is the same year as the Troubles broke out. And throughout the 70s, the the IRA campaign drained Britain. I'm never going to admit this, but it did drain them, the treasury and manpower and all the rest of it, and effectively reduced it. It was still a powerful country in the 1960s, and now, what is it now? They can't even protect their wee girls from immigrants who are raping them. So it's a sad sack of a country now, but we don't need them here. They just need to go. And people are talking about vote. Why should we vote? Vote for what? I don't have to vote to be Irish. I'm Irish. I want to be Irish, and I intend to stay here by the grace of God. And the English are the only ones that the British establishment has to get out of this country. As simple as that. And we have to whip the rest of it into some form of Irishness, so that they'd be proud to be Irish. And this is where history comes in. If you deny people their history, they don't know what they are. They're just all TikTok people, and that's sadly what's going on at the minute. We have a young generation who hasn't a clue about where they came from or what the great nation that we are. So we've got to restore that as well.
So you'd restore us culturally, religiously, and culturally as well, Irish language and history.
Yeah, well, if I could do that, I'd have it done already. But I'm just saying that that's what needs to be done.
Yeah.
We have to, the senior Republicans, so-called, and Sinn Féin, forget about them. They're wasters. They're nothing. Most of them that die, they're buried like dogs. They don't have any funeral mass or nothing. They stand for nothing, they believe in nothing. We've seen there two individuals cackling and laughing at Dublin Castle when, to their great shame, the Irish people voted to kill their own unborn children. Can you imagine that in 2018? in the so-called referendum, cackled and laughed, holding up a shabby cardboard sign saying the North is next. North is next for what? For murdering unborn little innocent children, painfully killing them, Irish children, reducing the Irish population. So Cromwell didn't even come up with that one. And they're cackling and laughing. That shows how stupid they are for starters, but also how deranged, spiritually sick those people are, those two particular individuals.
And you were on the Ard Corla, were you?
I was an Ard Corla Sinn Féin. God forgive us.
Yeah. Well, can you describe the atmosphere then behind the scenes?
Well, it was it was only a rubber stamp show. You know, I mean, everything was done. Everything works behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Nothing happens within the Republic that hasn't been decided by a group of increasingly decrepit old men in the background. So that's where that was at.
And who are they? You're talking about the Army Council?
Well, I'm not going to name anybody at this point in time, but they're slowly dying off.
Yeah.
But in any case...
But you would say the Army Council does control the Ard Corla?
Well, I didn't say that, but I said there's a group of men behind there, or people behind the scenes, who effectively make the decisions, and that filters down. And there's very little opposition. I remember on one occasion we were in, there was prior to an Ardèche, and when motions come forward, and they're discussed, and then they go onto the car, or whatever. And it came a motion through from West Cork, from Bantry, as I recall, coming there, and it was wonderful. I couldn't have written better myself, but it was 100% pro-life, and that this Ardèche condemns abortion, or something to that effect. So it had just basically hit the table, and it was ripped up and thrown in the bin. That's as far as it. It wasn't discussed, nothing. It wasn't by the feminists who had infiltrated Sinn Féin, and with Adams's full support. You know, don't be under any illusions. The man is anti-Catholic. Simple as that. Same as in my opinion. Yeah. And one of his statements there recently, when Shane McGowan was buried, that maybe this is the beginning of the democratization of the Catholic Church. Well, no Catholic would ever say a thing like that. Simple as that.
So when we talk about British infiltration of the IRA and all that, you wouldn't think it could go as far as Adams and McGuinness?
No, I look. It's not for me to say,
and
I'm not going to say it. I'll reserve judgment on that one. But history will decide, and history will judge.
Because McGuinness did live a kind of a charmed life a little bit, in comparison to yourself. I mean,
well,
he was actually the first minister, wasn't he, in the North? Well, while you had to go to jail.
Deputy,
Deputy,
Well, I mean, I went to jail because I stood in an election against Sinn Féin, effectively. And throughout that period, we argued that there was a de facto amnesty through these on the run letters. And when that hit the front pages at one stage, and Sean Woodward, who since left his wife and married a man, he a close friend to the Sinn Féin leadership. He's the Labour Party, British Labour Party, something or other in the NIO, the Northern Ireland office at the time. He said that he actually, on a Sunday morning, which is unheard of, came in, went on the news and, oh, it's nonsense, it's just ridiculous, there's no such thing as a deal has been done and so on. So I was dragged through diplomat courts, through prison when there was a dirty protest going on where human excrement was being smeared all over the walls and riot squads and dogs coming in and you name it. Sinn Féin refused to budge, they refused to say there was such a thing in the island of equals that they talk about. But then lo and behold, about a year after I had got out on the Good Friday Agreement clause after 2 years, an individual by the name of John Downey got arrested. He was charged with attacks in Britain, and I think horses were blown up, 6 soldiers dead, something like that. Very, quite significant charges. And he was released from court within a few months when they said yes, there had been a deal. So, there's your Ireland of equals for you. I was one Irish Republican who was not allowed to get out. I was dragged through, and I had heart attacks prior to that. I mean, I was physically not. I think they actually wanted me to die in there, so I wouldn't be a problem for them. But thanks be to God, I survived anyhow. But the point is that it's all game playing. They have, for whatever reason, they are now under the control of the British in a wider sense, and the British call the shots. And they just have to jump, whatever it is. So you don't have any leisure there. They introduced pro-abortion laws, British pro-abortion laws. They also run the place in power in Britain, and they lay wreaths for the British Army, who gunned our people down here, you know, and threw us in jail and tortured us in barracks and whatnot. So they're laying wreaths for them. Can you imagine? I mean, that's just the same as in the south, laying wreaths for the black and tans and burnt Cork. An Irish politician doing something like that. That's beyond belief. Beyond belief.
But you wouldn't go so far as to say that it was all a plan, like, and that they always were working for the British. Or...
Well, look, I'm sure it's not for me to say. I don't have the facts at my disposal. Maybe we can all jump to their own thing. What I can say is that the young men and women who were doing the actual fighting weren't compromised because they couldn't survive, they couldn't last, simple as that. And they're the heroes, they're the true heroes. Yeah. And no doubt it will emerge in due course that there were some serious traitors up in the top. Yeah. But that's, you know, probably something that will be revealed in the future. I don't know, I can't tell you. I mean, I have my suspicions, I have my facts as well, but I'm not prepared to disclose them at this stage. And we all know different things. But that's the nature of the beast.
Well, for an outsider looking in then, and just at that recent history, say 70s and 80s in East Tyrone, who would you say were definitely not working for the British and that people could take inspiration from as good people or whatever?
Well, the hunger strikers.
Yeah.
You know, Bobby Sands and local man here, Martin Hurston, and all the others. Those are heroes. Those are great men. Yeah. They were tremendous men. And I was up in Donegal recently, and a good friend of mine up there, she told me that she went to the local TD up there, and he said she cornered him about the abortion issue, and she said, "Oh, the hunger strikers would have supported abortion." What a thing to say! I mean, I can categorically deny that, because at that era, in that time, the Irish people were utterly opposed. You know, that was. It still is a horrendous thing. Unfortunately, the minds have shifted and the faith has weakened. But that was utterly and totally unacceptable at that point in time. So no way, not chance. I mean, there were some of them might have been not as strongly in the Catholic as others, but there were strong. Martin Hurst was a great Catholic.
And you campaigned for them, did you?
Sure.
In that election, yeah.
Well, I mean, I was heavily involved in the Republican movement at the time, and although South Tyrone is part of the Fermanagh South Tyrone constituency, and we were working on behalf of Bobby Sands, and he got elected, as you know.
Yeah.
And that was great. That's another story unto itself. But it was a bitterly fought election, and I mean bitterly fought, because you know we were putting up posters, and the RUC would come and tear them down. You know, your impartial police force. Yeah. And some speeches, myself and Brendan McAlliskey, were incredible as this may sound. We were speaking together on the same platform, and in Listen to Skate, I think it was in Fermanagh, and there were a loyalist crowd gathered, you know, and they were vicious, you know, and we had to walk through like walking a gauntlet, but they hadn't the backbone in them to really take into us, you know. Yeah. But having said that, when Sands got elected, we went on a kind of drove around South Tyrone, you know, claiming that he got elected. It was, I suppose, a bit of
triumphalism.
Yeah, no, I can't think of any other word. I'm trying to think of another word, but yeah, triumphalism. And it riled them up to no extent. And we went into an area of Dungannon that you wouldn't normally be found in, and we drove through it. And then we had to turn and come back. By that time they had regrouped, and this old gal came out. And back in that area you had a lot of, but every towns were sealed off, gates and towns to prevent from car bombs and stuff. And also large barrels with iron bars running through them, or tubing up the sides of streets and stuff, you know. And this old gal came out, she must be 90 years of age, and her Union Jack that was all tattered. She must have pulled it out from under the bed or something, and she was about to take us on. Fair play to her, you know. And she came out like that there, and she was waving this Union Jack, and she was right over one of the barrels, like, you know. But there you go. So she still supported the empire anyway, you know. Yeah. But both her and it are now gone. And it was, Bobby Sands, that was a tremendous period. And the modern day Sinn Féin is a disgrace to the memory of iconic Republicans like him and the others.
Yeah. So do we need a new political party or a new movement, or how
No,
does
we
that
need a
work?
mind. We need a movement. A movement, probably yes. And I'm quite content that that's going to happen. It's going to come together. Our Lady will bring it together. But we need a shift in the mindset.
Yeah.
I need a shift away from this kind of West Brit mentality, and also the decadence of the Western world. Certain things are unacceptable. You know, abortion is unacceptable. Contraception is unacceptable. Homosexuals parading about and playing housey, marrying one another, and infiltrating our schools, more importantly, is utterly unacceptable. Now, I have a young daughter at a school, and homosexuals and lesbians come in to groom them, actually groom them, 13, 14-year-olds, under the guise of anti-bullying and all this nonsense, you know. But I found out about it, they actually come in, they're talking, once they get in, they talk about what the various words, what L means and G means and all the rest of it. And then there are other groups come in which are totally Masonic, and the Catholic Church, the hierarchy knows about them, they've farmed this out, teaching the children about relationships and so on. But if you go into their website, you see that it's pure pornography, what they're teaching the children about abortion and about all kinds of filth. And no Catholic school should be teaching that. Should teach them the rosary, teaching them the power of the faith, and what the Eucharist is all about and what our great faith is. But they're corrupting our children at an early age, and it's the system is complicit in it. So there needs to be a big shake up there. The bishops are they seriously are letting the faith down compared to Oliver Plunkett. And I know we were recently in a church where both you and I where his head is there, one of the great martyrs. Now he set an example, and I would hesitate to think that any of his modern day successors would do that. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I am wrong, but the faith is, we need leadership from the church authorities.
Yeah. So you would call for a new Irish political movement, which would be much more aggressively Catholic, if you like.
Well, I'm not calling for anything, but what I'm saying is that I spent my whole life basically, for Faith and Fatherland, is the best way I can put it, dedicated to it. And I want to see the British out of Ireland. I want to see the Irish in Ireland, be Irish again. Yeah. But none of that can be done, I believe, without, first of all, having the Catholic faith. Now, if you analyse Irish history, the only time we were successful, in particular the 26 counties, was when the Catholic faith was strong, really strong. I mean, we had that episode, as I mentioned earlier, about back in the Isle of Saints and Scholars and so on. But there came a new golden age, post-penal era, which was from about the 1860s roughly, for about a century, from 1860s to 1960s. But its absolute heyday, of course, was 1910, 1920s, when the church was strong, it was a devotional church. The buildings that we all take for granted now were being put up then, often in defiance of the British and the landlords and whatnot. The school system, rigidly Catholic, and they were also extremely nationalistic. And as a consequence of it, the young people who were going in this in the 1880s and 90s were emerging as Gaeilgeoir, they were emerging as strong nationalists, and then you had 1916 and the success of 19... Like, stop and think about it.
Yeah.
They prayed the rosary in the GPO during Easter week, So that was, there's no, what more could you get? Those were strong Catholic patriots. You wouldn't get the Shinners now praying the rosary, they'd be doing yoga or some new age airy fairy stuff.
But just to do the devil's advocate again,
again, you want to never stop. You need an exorcism.
But at the wedding that yourself and myself were at, I was just speaking to a guy who was involved in a lot of political campaigns. Yeah. And he points out that any Irish political party that ever had Catholic in the title, never seemed to get anywhere.
So don't put it in. Who said you needed it? Yeah. You don't have to call it Catholic. I'm not even, I don't know where we went down this rabbit hole. I never said that about a Catholic party or anything. I just said we need to shift the mindset. Once you shift the mindset, the Catholics, look at Labour, for example. Yeah. The most, in the Free State, like the Labour in the South, oh gosh, a shuddering thinking about them. Are as repulsive as you could to look at, never mind to read their policies as you could possibly get. And yet we had the Labour leaders in the past in the Dáil saying, first and foremost, I am a Catholic, and then I am whatever it is after that. Right, yeah. So once your culture is Catholic, everything else is fine.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. You get the
Yeah.
politics that reflect
Yeah.
the people. And anyway, we're in for a big chastisement here. That'll settle, and that will be brought about because they voted for abortion and they voted for homos to get married. Those are all abominations in the eyes of God. It was basically like looking up God and spitting in his face. And now payback is coming. Be sure of that.
But you've been involved in a lot of groups around Ireland, in some cases who were under great pressure, like obviously the Republican movement at times in the 80s.
Yeah.
But also some Catholic groups I think you were involved in about 10 years ago. Or, so do you have advice for people now? There's many people in the south of Ireland particularly are very angry about the mass migration and issues like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they would like to know, how do you knit together a sort of a mass movement?
The reason is that the country has been given over to non-nationals I should say, is because we've abandoned our faith. It's a simple, I'm trying to say this all along. Yeah. Once you abandon the faith, God takes that protection away from you. Yeah. The sovereignty of the nation is not as strong as it was before, and that they should be given to people that have faith, and as simple as that. And we're in for a good booting for more sound, like the Vikings, the Normans, whatever you want to call them. I believe the Islam God will use Islam to scourge the Irish, and then they'll get back to being Catholics again, and we'll repeat the whole show all over.
Okay, but for fear of getting Putin myself, if I could just press you
metaphorically speaking.
No, it's just that, because people then make the counter argument. They'd say that, hold on, a faith, it has to be very voluntary. And the man above only wants people to come who walk there voluntarily. Yeah. And if you sort of form some sort of overtly Catholic political movement, or if you got power and you created an overtly Catholic state, is there an element there which you could end up, being other than voluntary in people's, going on with the Catholic faith?
You can't force faith on anyone. That's obvious. People have to come along. But if you create the conditions, they will come along. You can't just go around and like Charlemagne and batter the pagans into being Catholic. But nobody said you couldn't try. But at the same time, it usually doesn't work. But you can make the conditions such that people want to be. When my grandparents were growing up, for example, they were growing in the late 1890s and early 1900s in a very strong Catholic culture, notwithstanding all the Protestants around this part of the world. And I remember my grandma even telling me that when she was a mother and she had a young family, they would pray the rosary religiously, so to speak, every night. And the tradition of Cailling was very strong. Even when I was a young person, Cailling was just people coming and visiting one another, just talking over, talk local gossip and discuss folklore and who's related to whom and so on and so forth. It was very strong then, but she used to tell me that even orange men would come in on their Cailey, local neighbours, and they would kneel down, when the rosary's been said, which for me was remarkable, but it was a case and they would just go along with it. There wasn't a problem there. So the faith was very strong. The Catholic culture was unbreakable. And out of that then you got priests and nuns and vocations and so on and so forth. And of course the mindset of the people, including those politically oriented, would have been strongly Catholic.
So in short, you can promote the Catholic faith without sort of compelling people to.
Of course, it speaks for itself.
Yes. For example, if you had political meetings, you could have say a prayer at the beginning of it, at the end of it, and people don't have to participate if they don't want to. They can look upon it as a minute silence.
Well, if they don't want to, they're probably not going to. It's as simple as that. But that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't do it. And this is one of the mistakes of the modern incarnations of republicanism here in the north. They've decided that they're not going to have a decade of the rosary at gravesites. There's no more obvious place to have a decade of the rosary than the side of a person. The person in the grave could probably benefit from a rosary. And it's nonsensical. But that shows how the faith is weakened and been abandoned. And of course, nature abhors a vacuum, and so does spirituality. And when you abandon the Catholic faith, the devil shoots right in there. And then they become much more strong. The demonic grip gets a grip of the individuals and the groups as well. And this is why people with groups which would be unthinkable for them to promote abortion 40 years ago are now making out that it was perfectly normal and natural, which is not. We're killing unborn children. That's not acceptable. If there were slave markets going on in the local towns, people would be protesting. You'd like to think protesting. But this is way more serious than that, and it's been shoved under the carpet.
And now, by the looks of it, we could get euthanasia.
Well, it's inevitable. I mean, I was taught Latin and religion by the late Father Fall, very controversial figure, and
You were taught by him personally.
yes, oh yeah,
Father Dennis Fall.
Beg your pardon?
Father Dennis Fall.
Yeah, Dennis Fall, yeah.
Yeah.
And in the 70s, I mean, he made us into anti-abortion Catholics. So any of his students, he made that did a good job, and he was very. He said, contraception leads to abortion. Abortion leads to euthanasia. Simple as that. And divorce is in the mix there somewhere as well. And he was 100%. And this for us seemed like absurd back in the early mid-70s, because it was such a strong Catholic culture. Troubles going on all around us and all, you name it, and there was a mentality that was we're going to hold on to what we have here, you know.
Yeah.
But that's been weakened over the years, and we now find ourselves in the situation that we're in, and we've got to counter it. Those of us who have the faith, and by the way, I keep saying I'm not a plaster saint, and none of the saints were plaster saints either when they were on earth. But we have to do what we have to do to enlighten people and bring them all along with us, you know. And I have to listen to other people who are way more mature in the faith than I could ever possibly be, and recognise that and be humble about it. And you know, but I do know we have to do it in whatever way, shape, or form we play our little role.
Do you know? But it's very interesting to take on a simple issue. You know, you're part of the Ulster Irish.
Yeah.
You're in East Tyrone. And the one thing about it is you went from majority to minority, but you stayed there, you survived. I mean, in a kind of a way, the Ulster Irish should have gone the way of the Apaches. It is, you became a very small number of people. But you obviously, went down to your roots in Irishness and in Catholicism.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there are communities now in the south of Ireland who feel like they're a minority as well, and they're going the way of the Apache.
Oh, well, that's okay, and feel that way, but don't give up. I mean, we're actually better off here in the north in many respects, because we have still a strong residual Catholic faith, primarily due to the fact that there are so many Protestants, and there's still that old sectarian tribalism. Well, if they're going to church, we can go to mass. That type of thing. Mightn't be too deep the religion, but at least if you're going, it'll be nourished to some extent. But again, that's weakening in certain areas as well. So one of the interesting things is, and this is actually really, I can't get my head around this one either, is that in a good way, I go to traditional Latin Mass, and I've discovered that some of the people, because there's no one parish who come from all over and go to these churches, and in one case, I discovered that a lot of the ones people around me, and I noticed that they all looked kind of different, we have that old sort of radar inside, and they looked slightly different, and yet they were the same dialect and they spoke English and all that. But it turns out they were Protestant, they were Catholic converts, and some of them come from the most loyalist areas that I wouldn't be caught dead in, or if I was caught, I would be dead in them, and they were better Catholics than I. And lo and behold, one of the priests who, the most recent Mass, just a couple of days, on the 6th, on the Feast of the Epiphany, was actually a Protestant convert, a local guy, from the north of Ireland. So this is really a new dimension altogether. These people are stronger Catholics than us, and they're going back into the faith after centuries of being out of it through the traditional Latin Mass, and that's very encouraging. That's remarkably encouraging.
So it is actually growing a little bit, Catholicism in Ireland. It just seems to have turned a corner a few years ago. It seems to be ancient before.
It'll come bouncing back. I'm not in the slightest bit concerned about that. You'll have your weaklings who abandon it, at the first job of a hat, but you'll also have the strong Catholics, the people who would hold on, come what may, and who would be prepared to be martyrs if it was needed. So don't get this has happened over the centuries, nothing new. It's not modern. Back to the time of the Reformation, the sellouts that were there, and times of famine and whatnot. You had the supers, So there's nothing new under the sun. But we learn from all of that.
So is there anything in
Well,
particular you'd like to say? I know we didn't go into your career very much, but anything you'd really like to say?
yeah, well, I mean, I would just encourage, I know there are a lot of people who are discouraged right now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, never give in to that, ever. Don't get into discouragement. Never stop praying. Always have confidence and strength. Bear in mind there are plenty of people like you, like me, and like others who are staunch in the faith, loyal to the faith. This is a time of challenge. This is not a time of defeat or weakness. This is an opportunity. Now we get stood into the fight. I mean, I read somewhere once where some old American general was in Southeast Asia, and he says, right, the enemy, he said they're in front of us, they're to each side of us, and they're behind us. They have us completely surrounded, so they're not going to escape this time. And I thought that was a great mentality, and that's the sort of mentality that we need. Now I've been shot at, I've been tortured, I've been you name it, tons of abuse hurled at me by I don't know what sort of specimens they were, but they were cowardly ones. But who cares about that? And that's all good. Like if you come through, you don't give up. The devil wants to put you down, to frighten, put an end to us speaking out, preventing us from being Irish, preventing us from being Catholic. And this country is a Catholic nation, nothing else. It never will be anything else. And the stronger we are as Catholics, the stronger we will be as an Irish nation. Simple as that. And we must never give up. So we need to get back to the traditional anthem Mass, big families, everything you can possibly think of, everything that's going to annoy the elite, effectively. Just go for it. And don't worry about anything else, so it'll all work out. And at the end of the day, you'll die, And before you hit the ground, if let's say you're walking around, you're shot in the head, before your body hits the ground, you've been judged and put wherever you're going to go. Yeah. So I would advise people to get to confessions as often as they can, and go to a communion and so on and so forth. And let's be strong in the faith, and let's not, don't be weak. And there are people coming into the country. Some of those people are good people. We'll absorb them, and they'll bring good Catholicism with them. Yeah. So that's nothing to be afraid of, or anything of that nature. But we must be very, very careful about the ideas that the Masonic globalist agenda wants to force on us. So we have to be nationalistic. We have to be proud to be, not in a bombastic fashion or aggressive, but be proud to be Irish, and Chunga Gaeilge, the Catholic faith, all together. So one big happy family.
Okay, so will I leave it at that?
Well, can we end with a prayer?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, amen. Blessed Michael the Archangel, defend us in the hour of battle, be our safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God restrain him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust Satan down to hell, and with him all the wicked spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Good minute, Mark. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lord.